Good evening, everyone. You may not find it on your program, but I think the way I live, we need to begin with a word of prayer. But will you please stand? Because I brought my personal pastor along with me. So as you stand and bow your heads in prayer, we hear Pastor Jeff Brooms lead a prayer. Almighty and everlasting Father, I invoke your presence and your blessings upon this evening's launch. We thank you for allowing Sir Frank Worrell to be the type of person that he was. And we thank you for infusing the relevant strength and vision into our Professor Sir Hilary Beckles to allow him to bring this book to fruition. I pray that you may bless this evening and all that takes place here, to protect all present here and to take them home safely when they depart. All of these things we ask you in the precious name of your beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Minister, I was expecting more than one minister here this evening, but I see the minister from my parish of birth. And so my minister from St. Peter, welcome, sir. I'm Ambassador, thank you, welcome. Principal Sir Hilary Beckles, I never get tired of calling your name. I've been calling it, I've added the principal and the professor and the sir, but I've known this name for 57 years, and it's always something good to hear coming from my voice, my friend. Dean Carter, I saw, did I see Principal Landis come in? Did I see him come in? Oh, we have a, sorry, madam. Oh, sorry, sir. Mr. Principal Yui, Deputy Principal, welcome. Other distinguished and special invited guests, members of the university community, media, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to stand here this evening as the identified chairperson for the proceedings. Frank Worrell is known to most people as a cricketer. He's known to the author as you can see, a revolutionary. I've only seen Frank, well, in my time, I've only seen Frank Worrell once in my entire life. There are 3 W's. I had a pretty good relationship with both Sir Everton and Sir Clyde. I have the opportunity to interview both of them at different times. I remember Sir Clyde even coming into the radio station of VOB to sit with me, and Sir Everton going to Queen's College to sit with me to interview in front of the schoolboys there. But the only time I ever saw Sir Frank in my entire life was in 1965. Here was a little first form boy at Colleton Parish School, and he was manager of the West Indies team that played Australia. He had just given up being the captain, and Sir Gary Sobers had taken over as captain. He managed the team for that series in 1965. That we won, by the way, 2-1. Whenever you get a chance to say that the West Indies won, I want to say it over and over again. You don't get to say it very often these days. No. So Frank began very well. I can give the little cricket thing. There are two snippets I want to give about him. After he selected for his first test, he was selected to replace an injured icon, Sir George Headley. George Headley. He played in for George Headley, who was injured, and immediately presented himself with an innings of sure class. He made 97. And then he retained his play for the second test, and they went to Guyana. He followed this up, that 97, with what people discover and explain as mastery. And he scored 131 not out, and there set his path of success. But that is the cricket part of it. The book is not really focused on this, but I want to get the part that I know about it, because when you get this book in your hand, you will understand the great writing of Professor Beckles, but the greatness of the man, Sir Frank Worrell. Good old Bajan boy who has done well in almost every sphere of endeavor. Now, before I go on too long, because I've always been told one of my leaders, one people I have a lot of admiration for, Mr. Alvin Adams, he once said to me, You do not give a principal a chance to talk. They don't know ever how to shut up. So I will follow his advice and cut that short. And I will ask now at this Ambassador David Commission, if you please come and join us here and give a few words to us.
Good evening. After Principal Jeff Brooms has so expertly given all of the correct salutations, permit me to piggyback on the protocol that Jeff has established and simply say, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, although I must make a special mention of the man of the moment, Sir Hilary Beckles, our Vice Chancellor and the chair of our CARICOM Reparations Commission. Sir Frank Worrell, cricket's first revolutionary. Frank Worrell's political war against colonialism in the West Indies. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that Frank Worrell has finally, some 58 years after his death, has finally found his natural, organic, and qualified biographer. Or perhaps to put it another way, Sir Hilary Beckles has finally found the core subject that his whole life, his training, his life experience has prepared him for. I don't think anybody else than Sir Hilary Beckles could have written this book about a Bajan, a Caribbean man who was claimed not only by Barbados, but by Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago to some extent, a man of the Caribbean diaspora in the UK, a cricketer, a political activist, a regionalist. I think who else but Sir Hilary mirrors that and is the ideal academic to tell this story that up to now has not been told. I mean, we have been told the story of Frank Worrell, the cricketer. We have been told the story of Frank Worrell, the gentleman. We are now finally, 58 years after his death, getting the story of the revolutionary Frank Worrell and his war against colonialism. I must say that I didn't have a copy of the book in that form. It was sent to me. I got an email copy, so I had to do a lot of printing. But I must say that in some ways, having read it, I found it to be a sad book. Why do I say a sad book? A sad book because it tells the story of the tragedy of this great man's victimization and the denial of his just deserts over a prolonged period of time, more than a decade. Sad because it tells the story of the tragedy of his early death. 42 years old, after he seemed poised to do so much for our Caribbean civilization. He was snatched away from us, and it gives me a great sense of responsibility this evening to know that he's buried just a few hundred yards away from here, that this Cave campus meant a lot to him, that it was he, in fact, who designed the playing field, the cricket field. A, a sad book because it tells the story of the denial to him of the credit that was due to him as an architect of our sovereignty, of our Caribbean civilization. This is the great wrong that Sir Hilary sets out to correct in this book. We have given him credit for being a great cricketer, but he was so much more than that. And the credit that he deserved as a statesman, as an architect of our nationhood, has been denied him up to now. It is also a sad book because there's the tragedy that we have done to ourselves by having such a great man and neglecting to tell his story. You know, I feared when I came here, when I was coming here today, I said, you know, I suspect that the audience will be an elder audience and that our youth will not be here because our youth simply don't know about Frank Worrell, about the relevance of Frank Worrell. But I'm so glad that Hilary wrote this book. I'm glad that I read this book. It has really opened up my eyes to this man that I've heard about. And, you know, I had two elder friends, two bank hall boys, much older than me, Edmund and Victor. Victor has passed on now. Edmund is still with us. I was hoping that he would have made it here this evening. But many years ago, Edmund and Victor would speak about this Frank Worrell. Edmund and Victor were bank hall boys who, as youngsters, knew Frank Worrell, watched Frank Worrell play cricket, and they would speak of this Frank Worrell as a veritable god. And I never understood it. They never argued. It was as if the assertion broke no discussion. It didn't need to be explained. It was as if you didn't know, you didn't know. But if you knew, you knew. And I now, having read the book, I now have a better understanding of why these bank hall boys saw Frank Worrell almost as this divine personality. In Hilary's book, he spends some time looking at some of the tributes that were paid to Frank after he passed. And I want to quote to you the words of George Headley, speaking about Frank as recorded in the book. And I quote, "The complete cricketer in quotation marks, was for George Headley a fair summary of Worrell's capacity. It was his batting that Headley focused on. Himself celebrated as the best batsman in the world, it was no simple task for him to deny that status in favor of Worrell, his cousin and protege. Quote, nobody living, he stated, can bat better than Worrell from a point of technical perfection. End of quote. That's George Headley saying that this man was technically the most perfect batsman in the history of cricket. Now I understand why Victor and Edmund spoke as they spoke. And then there was Sir Gary Sobers. And this is Hillary's record of Gary's statement. And I quote, "There is a captain appointed to a team. There is a public image captain. There is a more talented and experienced than all the other captains. There is a one of the boys captain. There is a strategist and tactician captain. There is a disciplinarian captain. There is a father figure captain. There's a social graces captain. There's an administrator captain, and a work with me and I will work with you captain. There are a hell of a lot of captains to fit into one man. Frank Worrell was all of them." I mean, tremendous compliment coming from the greatest all-rounder of all time. You know, I think I need to explain to you the core of this book. And rather than my trying to use my own words to explain the core of this book to you, I want to quote from Hillary, from the introduction, Hillary, your words in the introduction. I want you to listen very carefully, because this is what this book is all about. It's not simply about cricket. It's about much, much more than cricket. And this is what Beckles said, and I quote, "Only Fidel Castro stood out more globally and regionally as the Caribbean leader most determined to uproot political and institutional colonization. It is unfortunate then that Worrell has been sidelined as a visionary and radical activist. That he was, quote, only a cricketer, also supported the subjugation of sport and performance culture to the glamour and rhetoric of political parties and their leaders. Yet, organized performance culture was critical in defining both the regional integration movement and national independence. Worrell was the central and energizing force to both processes. The literary intervention and journalism of C.L.R. James have been embraced as representing the core narrative of cricket in the age of nation building. His writings in the cricket performance realm is seen as transcending Worrell's visioning and strategic activism. It is a classic case, however, of the cart being placed before the horse. James's narrating of Worrell's selection as captain in 1960 has decentered Worrell's role as the lead strategist at the helm of the popular struggle. Deconstructing the Jamesian literary hegemony, therefore, is a necessary first step towards a fuller appreciation of Worrell, the quintessential federalist, national decolonizer, and democratic political activist. He did as much politically beyond the boundary as anyone with the pen or from the political platform. What transpired was the rolling out on the field of a man's political mission to defeat racist domination by triggering the most remarkable democratic campaign, local, regional, and global, of the era. Worrell took on the imperial model and racial machination of organized elite power, won the support of the masses, became their hero, and in alliance with, but not subordinated to, the emerging party political elites and radical intellectuals, won the transformational battle. It was a lifelong struggle, evolving with new strategies year by year, cascading into multiple short-term successful skirmishes until the explosion of the grand victory. He was declared at the end of the decade the captain of his country by the reluctant and shamed WICBC. And what was his agenda? To take a group of young men, talented cricketers, and mold them into a deeply integrated West Indian federal enterprise, and to lead it into battle against the world and to win. Establishing the West Indies as the global champion of cricket was his objective. To achieve this, he needed to captain the ship. But first, he had to brilliantly survive, stay indispensable, and effectively compromise the oppressive order into surrendering in the face of cascading criticism. There has never been a more perfectly executed anti-colonial West Indian plan in scope and political dimensions. End of quote. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the core of this book. That is the argument that Sir Hilary sets out to vindicate in the 200 and I think 70-something pages of this book. And he does it so well and so convincingly that at the end of the book you are asking yourselves, why is this man not a national hero of Barbados, if not of the our entire Caribbean community? And you know why? Why indeed? I know that we can't blame you, Hillary. I know that you put forward the name when national heroes were being determined in Barbados, but there was a certain short-sightedness about what this man represented, a short-sightedness that this book is setting out to clarify. Brothers and sisters, the Order of National Heroes Act of Barbados sets out the criteria for eligibility. And there are three criteria. Either one, any one of the three would qualify a Barbadian as a national hero. One, the person has given outstanding service to Barbados, and his contribution, we should say his or her contribution, has altered the course of the history of Barbados. Worrell qualifies. Secondly, the person has given service to Barbados, which has been exemplified by visionary and pioneering leadership, extraordinary achievement, and the attainment of the highest excellence, which has redounded to the honor of Barbados. Again, he qualifies. And the third one, the person has, through his heroic exploits and sacrifice, contributed to the improvement of the economic and social conditions of Barbados and Barbadians generally. He qualifies on all three criteria, yet he was denied. And that was the fate of Frank Worrell. And you know, as we examine Sir Frank, we ask ourselves, what created this phenomenal human being? He came from among us, from Bank Hall, the Bank Hall community, a working class community. I would say, Sir Hilary, I would say he was a member of, perhaps we would want to say, the elevated working class, in the sense that he was able to attend Combermere School and so forth. He was able to have secondary education, but a working class boy from Bank Hall. And you know, when we look at this record of extraordinary individuals that Barbados has produced, the Frank Worrells, the George Lamming, Carrington Village, writing in the castle of my skin at the age of 21, having never attended any university, you know, Combermere at 21, writing a book that up to now, when I read that book, I cannot even fathom how a 21-year-old could be thinking and writing with such profundity. George Lamming, Gary Sobers from the Bayland at 21, breaking the world batting record, demonstrating a total mastery of the game of cricket at that precocious age. And we can go on. Young Rihanna from Westbury Road, what she was able to do, breaking records of Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson at the age of 17. You know, but what is this? What is there about this Barbados? That social environment that is capable of producing those kinds of individuals. You know, I won't go into it, but you know, C.L.R. James has written about it, something about the intimateness of our geography and our social culture. My own reading of it is that I think a lot has to do with the fact that we were the original location of the sugar revolution, the proto-industrial enterprise of creating sugar, the sugar factory, the whole organization of that proto-industrial enterprise took shape in Barbados from the 1640s. Our people were a proto-industrial proletariat for hundreds of years, developing a certain capacity. So there are several factors. But we have to place Frank in that exalted company, because when you look at it, Frank first represented Barbados, the national team, in 1942. He was 17 years old. He was a schoolboy at Combermere, playing for Barbados. He said he had to go to school first, and then he had to check in and make sure his name was recorded as being present, and then make his way to Kensington Oval to play for Barbados in 1942. And then 2 years later, in 1944, at the age of 19, the man scores a triple century against Trinidad at the age of 19, Frank Worrell. He is in that exalted company. And Jeff spoke about his test debut in the 1948 series against England here in the Caribbean, 97 in his very first test innings. But at the end of that series, he had scored 294 runs at an average of 147. at an average of 147, helping to secure a 2-love victory in the series for the West Indies. So this, this is a very remarkable individual. But the book makes that point about him, about how remarkable and outstanding he was as a cricketer, as a human being. But the book is really about his agenda and mission beyond simply quality performances on the cricket field. When Frank entered the Test arena for the West Indies in 1948, you are dealing with a colonial society. You're dealing with a society totally dominated by that white, racist, planter, merchant oligarchy. I mean, we all know the story. Slavery is abolished in 1834, 1838. For 100 years after, little or nothing has changed for the masses of the black people of the Caribbean. Barbados is one of the most oppressive because it is in Barbados, the classic sugar plantation economy, that the planter class is most entrenched. Barbados and Jamaica become notorious for the brutal oppression of the working class masses of our people. So Frank comes into that environment, and Frank demonstrates, even as a little boy at Combermere, that he's a rebel. In fact, he's nearly expelled from Combermere because he challenges authority. And so in 1948, West Indian cricket is under the domination of the white planter merchant oligarchy. They control the West Indian Cricket Board of Control. They have imposed a racist structure. Black cricketers are never to be in any leadership position. White supremacy has to be maintained. Not only the substance of white supremacy, but even the appearance, the symbolism. These black cricketers, no matter how outstanding they are, must be seen to be under the authority and dominance and control of white authority figures. And the cricketer is treated like a serf. He's not treated. Most of the white cricketers come from the professional class. They come from families of means. They come from the business class. They have money. They have resources. They don't need to depend on cricket as a professional sport to live. The black cricketer, who is not so fortunate, who only has his talent, the structure says, you are to be treated like a serf. We will determine what we give you in remuneration. You will accept that. There will be no negotiation. There will be no talking back on your behalf. You simply fit into this system of white dominance and authority. After that first test series, when Frank performed so well, the first thing Frank did as he launched this career, this campaign, because Frank from the beginning set out to demolish that entire structure, that white supremacist structure. And his first tactic was to declare himself a professional cricketer. And that henceforth, he will be negotiating his contract with the West Indies Cricket Board of Control. Unheard of. That was the first shot across the bow. He migrated to Jamaica in 1947. and then onwards to England, to the Lancashire Leagues, where he had the support in England of Larry Constantine, of Sir Arthur Lewis. He distinguished himself from other black cricketers by pursuing a university education. So Frank began from 1948 to craft this strategy and this campaign to bring down that whole structure of white dominance. And at the core of the structure of white dominance was the idea that the position of captain of the West Indies cricket team must always be in the hands of a white man. So that wherever this team toured, especially where they toured to white countries, even if they did well, it must always be said the reason they did well is because they were under the direction and control of a white captain. Frank decided he had to demolish all of that. And so Hillary, in this book, explains this campaign that went on for well over a decade. And what did the campaign, well, it consisted, first of all, Frank declaring himself a professional, Frank challenging the West Indies Cricket Board that he had to negotiate his salary. Frank strategically, at times, refusing the West Indies Cricket Board, turning his back on them. I will not tour. I will not accept the terms you're offering. And he always cleverly had a way out. Well, I will not tour because I have to pursue my university studies at the University of Manchester, just to give an example. Refusing to tour. At one point, even refusing the captaincy when the West Indies Cricket Board had begun to feel the heat. So we'll make you captain to go on tour India or Pakistan. And Frank understood where they were coming from. No, he was not falling for that. No. We want a black captain that will lead this team into white countries, that will lead it in England and Australia, you know. And he carried on this campaign very cleverly, because what he did, he made sure that by his performance on the field, that he was seen by the West Indian masses, by the cricket public in England, in Australia, all across the world. His merit was so outstanding that when the white West Indies Cricket Board continued irrationally and obstinately to deny him, it generated a reaction. You know, during that era of the 1950s, you had Martin Luther King. You had all of these, you had these liberation and civil rights struggles going on. A very important struggle was the struggle of Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King had learned from Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi had pursued a tactic based on the doctrine of Satyagraha, a soul force that is generated by undeserved and unrequited suffering. That was central to Gandhi's campaign. It was central to Martin Luther King's campaign. And it was central to Frank Worrell's campaign. In other words, if it becomes so clear to everyone that this man is being victimized, this man is unfairly being denied, that generates a sympathy, a soul force that is then deployed against the oppressor. That was the strategy of of Martin Luther King. The black people had a legitimate cause. He said, we don't even fight back violently. Let them do. But he knew that was generating a soul force. And this was central to Frank's strategy. But it meant that he had to be on top of his game. He had to be excellent in everything he did. So Frank fought this battle for over a decade. The West Indian masses, everybody looking on, began to say, but clearly, this is the man who, by merit, should be leading the West Indies team. The English intellectuals, the cricket writers, it became so clear that what was being done was a racist victimization of this outstanding representative of the black people of the Caribbean. That eventually those he prevailed. The whole thing became unsustainable. In fact, I won't say the straw because it was much more than a straw, but the event that really broke the camel's back, as Sir Hilary tells it, was a riot at the Queen's Park ground in 1958, Hilary? It's 58? 59, 1959. Because our people, the frustration had built up. They're seeing their beloved West Indies team floundering under white captains, much less qualified, not just than Frank, but Everton, Clyde, any of them. Goddard, Dennis Atkinson, Jerry Alexander, Jeffrey Stallmeyer, all white from the elite classes, much less qualified and talented than Everton Weekes, Clyde Walcott, and the greatest of the three. Incidentally, Frank was older, slightly older than both Everton and Walcott. And Frank was very much a kind of mentor to Everton, and he had a kind of difficult relationship with Clyde Walcott, which I won't go into here. But Frank, among all the black cricketers, was seen as the father figure, the natural leader. And so the frustration had built up in the Caribbean people, and the dam broke in 1959 when there was an incident in that test match in Port of Spain where the crowd felt that an injustice had been done to one of our players, and they erupted. But central to that eruption was the built-up frustration with the cricket authorities over the treatment of black players and Frank Walcott in particular. So the other point that we need to make about Frank is that Frank, remember the 1950s, The 1950s. So on Saturday, we are going to commemorate the rebellions of the 1930s, people's rebellions of the 1930s that give rise to political parties, trade unions, the Dean Commission here in Barbados, the Moyne Commission. We create a Caribbean, a West Indian labor movement. By the 1950s, that movement is advancing demands for self-government and federation. Strikingly, Frank goes to Jamaica in 1947. Now, what happens? What is 1947 famous for? Well, 1947 is the famous Montego Bay Conference in Jamaica, where all of the leading political and labor leaders of the Caribbean, Grant Lee Adams from Barbados, Albert Gomes, Norman Manley, Robert Bradshaw, Vere Bird, they're all in Montego Bay confronting the British colonial authorities over the question of West Indian Federation. So Frank is part of that. Frank is being influenced and impacted by that, but Frank in turn, and cricket in turn, and the black cricketers who are striving to emerge and to create a West Indian personality, they too are impacting on the political struggle. And then, so 47, the decision is made at Montego Bay that we are going to have a West Indian Federation. Yet, the British government procrastinates. It takes until 1958 before that federation is actualized. And then, within a short 4 years, that federation is no more. The political class, through infighting, the British colonial authorities, through their duplicity and their bastardization of the pristine concept of federation, they consigned the federal venture to failure. But as the federal venture, the political venture flounders, what is happening with the cricket? An opposite trajectory is taking place as the political construct declines, ultimately collapsing in 1962 when the entire federation collapses. The very opposite is going on with the black nationalist struggle within West Indian cricket. The people have spoken in 1959. Frank's decade-long campaign is coming to a climax. The people have spoken. The West Indies Cricket Board of Control is on the back foot. It cannot hold out much longer. By 1960, they have to concede. They finally concede. Frank Worrell, they give Frank Worrell the captaincy. They're forced. Frank then takes that team to Australia. That famous 1960 to 61 series in Australia, where that West Indian team, under black leadership for the first time, sets the world of cricket ablaze. People say they have never seen a test series like this. The first test, the Tide Test. Never before happened. The West Indians, Richie Benaud, all of these people, they say what makes this West Indian team so different, so special, is that this man, Worrell, has crafted them into a national unit. They are no longer Bajan and Jamaican and Guyanese players. They're now one unified, federated Caribbean team under this inspirational captain. So as the political federation is fracturing and collapsing under the skillful guidance of Worrell, the cricket federation is taking shape. Hillary describes it as a federal, that West Indies cricket team, a federal enterprise. 1961, that tour of Australia, 1960-61. September 1961, Jamaica holds the referendum. Jamaica holds a referendum to determine whether they will continue in the federation. At the same time that the West Indies cricket team has solidified as a federal structure and has gone to the top of world acclaim, Jamaica holds a referendum, decides to pull out. Early 1962, Eric Williams says, 1 from 10 leaves naught. We are pulling out 2. And the whole thing collapses a couple months later, at the very moment that the cricket has crystallized under black leadership as an outstanding federal enterprise. India come to the Caribbean, and the team that Frank Worrell has crafted in Australia demolishes India. Then Frank takes the team to England, and similarly, that team demolishes England. And as Hillary explains, Frank always understood that his mission would not be complete until that team becomes the champions of the world. By 1963, when they defeat England, Frank is 39. Frank knows that he can't continue, but part of the plan is to bring his successor on board. And who is his successor? This young man from the Bayland that he has nurtured. And incidentally, all the players will tell you, as Sober said, Frank was their father figure. Frank nurtured them. All through that decade of the 1950s, as Frank was waging his campaign, Frank was playing the guide, the father figure. He recognized the talent. He made sure he nurtured it, in many ways. And so Frank gives way to Sobers. Sobers is installed as captain under the say-so of Frank Worrell, because by then, the West Indies Cricket Board had lost the battle. Frank was now the man calling the shots. Frank becomes manager. Frank says, my presence needs to be there to shepherd the thing through to its final climax. And Australia comes to the Caribbean. This is the battle for the World Championship. The West Indies against Australia. And for the first time, the West Indies defeats Australia and become champions of the world. Frank's mission has been completed. Frank has destroyed that white racist control over the institution of West Indies cricket. He has supplanted it with an enterprise built on meritocracy, built on talent, that exudes Caribbean nationhood, a sense of West Indian pride and nationalism. Frank has done his job. Frank then leaves the field of cricket battle. He goes into the university, and he decides he's going to dedicate the rest of his life to helping to nurture and preserve that sense of West Indian nationhood, all the young talent that needs to go into it. Another part of Hillary's book that is very important is Hillary takes aim at C.L.R. James, because Hillary makes the point that James intervened in the discourse in 1959 when that riot took place. And James inserted himself, but Hillary makes the point that James, in a sense, was kind of pushing an open door because Frank had already done the job. The West Indies Cricket Board was really on the back foot, and it was only a matter now of time, not if Frank Worrell would be appointed captain, because the masses were demanding it. It was just a matter of time now when Frank Worrell would ascend to the throne. But James, the writer and activist, took up the cause in a big way, in a very public way, in a vehement way, using very strong language. And Hillary feels that by so doing, he succeeded in deflecting attention from the credit that really should go to Frank. And the impression came across that it was the activism of James that was decisive in making the breakthrough. And, this is somewhat peculiar because James's whole philosophy is really about First of all, James's philosophy is about the masses advancing historical development through mass-based concrete action, as opposed to the writings of philosophers or scribes. So, if James is true to his philosophy, the actions taken by the mass of the Caribbean people in 1959 is what must be given primacy. James as well, when you read Beyond the Boundary, James is very clear that the influence of the sportsman, the sports player, the artist, is just as significant as the influence of the political actor. James is very clear in Beyond the Boundary that he says, what do people want? When you ask them what they want organized sports. So James, in Beyond the Boundary, makes a classic defense of the agency and the importance and influence and relevance of artists and sports people. So it is somewhat ironic that the very man who advances those notions plays a role in minimizing both the agency of the crowd and the agency of this extraordinary sports figure. But where I would differ with Sir Hilary is that Frank's campaign was a kind of Martin Luther King campaign. Frank's campaign was conducted with dignity. Frank's campaign, as I said, soul force, based on undeserved suffering. Frank was able to draw into his orbit all of these the white establishment in England, people, the liberal establishment who were looking on and seeing this ugly spectacle of what white racism meant. Seeing a distinguished black man like Frank Worrell, so outstanding in everything, university graduate, tremendous cricketer, tremendous leader, being unfairly victimized and kept down by this ugly, white, racist culture. So Frank's way of confronting that ugly racism was to exude dignity, accomplishment. James now, when James started to write, James utilized violent language, decrying it as racist, launching vituperation. So, Hilary, I would say that sometimes that harsh language is required because the events deserve that harsh, condemnatory language. But suffice to say, the combination of Frank and C.L.R. James, of the people, won the victory. And ladies and gentlemen, I think Hilary Beckles has done us all a favor by giving us this book. I think I understand Frank Worrell. After what seemed to be a veritable lifetime of agitation and struggle, he wanted to go into a new phase of his life, of just setting a positive example, sharing and nurturing the new society and nation that was burgeoning. This book helps to identify and elucidate the successful struggle to achieve a very important part of our national culture that my generation, our generation, enjoyed and simply took for granted. When I came of age, we came of age in a West Indian nation in which our cricket was established as a West Indian enterprise bringing great honor and pride to us. I came of age in the era of Garfield Sobers and Clive Lloyd and Viv Richards, and we simply took that for granted. This book tells us that that didn't just fall out of the sky, that that had to be struggled for, that had to be won. And it is only in reading this book that the full dimensions of that struggle has been made clear to me. And if we are to be a conscious society, and we need to be a conscious society, and we need to ensure that our young people are conscious people, then we need to give ourselves that knowledge, that information about the past struggles, what we had to fight for, to achieve, that they didn't just, nobody gave them to us. Our ancestors had to fight to achieve these things for us. That great house of West Indian cricket that, unfortunately, some people now seem to be intent on destroying. But that had to be fought for by the Frank Worrells. And we can only be a conscious society if we are aware of and appreciate the rights that past generations fought for and won, and the struggles that produced those victories. And this book brings home to us that a fundamental struggle was the struggle of Sir Frank Worrell, and that all of us are beneficiaries of that struggle. Hilary, thank you once again for blessing us with this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for very extensive insight into the book. And there are three things I want to touch on it from what you said. I will always bring the cricket aspect into it. In 1960-61 to Australia, I remember that very, very, very well. One of the things that Sir Frank did at the end of that series, thousands lined the streets of Australia, thousands, to pay homage to Sir Frank and his West Indies team. That was a very significant moment. One thing to remember about it too, that very last over of the Tide Test, when he told Wes Hall, no bouncers, Wes Hall proceeded, well, 3 bouncers, disagreed with the captain. In terms of his Sir Frank's batting performance, we talked about his initiation in Test cricket, his 97 and 131 out. You talk about his triple century. But what is not also well known is 261 against Australia is the very first double century by a West Indian on foreign soil. Frank Worrell did that. Now, during that same period in early 1940s, late 1937, when Frank Worrell was shaping his thought process, at a different level, something was happening here in Barbados as well. He spoke about how the white planted class led everything. People like Frank may have got an opportunity, but people like Everton could not get an opportunity. So whereas Frank Worrell was trying to break down barriers, there was another Bajan revolutionary trying to create opportunities in the name of Mitchie Hewitt. I just wrote a book, I just finished writing a book, as Muffy, it was released on Amazon only Thursday, about the Barbados Cricket League and its impact on Barbados and West Indies cricket. And so there's a little difference. Frank Worrell's fight was at a higher level, for more sustained, but Mitchie's also trying to develop opportunities for the poor, people who were dispossessed and underprivileged. And I think we cannot get away from those things, how the different levels where the battles were fought. Now, you also brought in the link between Barbados and Jamaica, and this is opportune time for me now to invite my dear Sophie Lee. You're smiling very nicely, Sophie. Come on up, come on up. Sophie, will, as you see in your program, she will be reading a poem written by Edward Baugh. I'm sure she will read it with all the verve in the world. And come on up. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. With protocols being established, please allow me. The Pulpit Eulogist of Frank Worrell by Edward Baugh. They should have talked of cut and glance, described the dance he did on such or such day, on what green floor, on what astonished field. Instead, they said he was a gentleman, praised him as a model for his race, noted with what aplomb he took his place as senator, a leader cherished by his men, in friendship steadfast, who in spite of bitter recollection loved his country at last. Any clown can play the gentleman, but who could time a ball so sweetly, or flick a wrist so strong, so fleetly? Yet those who saw him in this day have left middle things to say. The strokes, the swing, the easy stance. But I lay you odds, all death's a game, that the God whom they commend his name, that God remembers, cut and glance, design, who knows? The deadly dance. Thank you.
The poet spoke about the cut. I have been reliably informed by others, I didn't say it myself, about one of the strengths of Frank Worrell, his depth late cut. Almost taking the ball out of the wicketkeeper's gloves. That's one of the qualities. People, if I speak to a lot of my friends about what's the best innings they've ever seen at Kensington, they tend to go to the Lawrence Road triple century. And they talk more about the 47 or 48 the evening before. I didn't see any of that because like the author and I, we were overseas studying at the time. But we will say that Frank Worrell was a standard that Lawrence Rowe tried to match. He was the leader with that same easygoing, classical batting style. That was Frank Worrell. Now, another person I'd never seen bowl, but there's stories about this guy running in and bowling a bouncer, and the ball hitting the sight screen and bouncing back onto the field. A number of years ago, I took a trip to Jamaica to where our Nortel and the 19 cricket tournament was being played. A team, I had managed the Barbados team for a number of years, but I was no longer manager. But obviously, I had this affinity to the boys. And I went to Jamaica, and a former West Indian fast bowler heard that I was there. His name was Chester Watson, and he came to my hotel, picked me up, to take me to wherever I wanted to go. What the place he took me is the Melbourne Cricket Ground. And there I met a man for the first time in my life. This is the guy they talk about who bowled this bouncer and hit the side screen, reverberated. His name is Roy Gilchrist. And I could not believe this little short man, but he had a lot of life in him. And then I was listening to something said by Professor Sir Hilary Beckles about the battle Sir Frank fought and why how Gilchrist was part of it. I'm sure he would speak more about that. And Jerry Alexander was the captain at the time. But this guy was so full of life, Roy Gilchrist. And I can only imagine how this man with such speed and such ability was destroyed by the white captain. At this stage, and I will not delay any further, I honestly believe my friend, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies, please come join me at the podium and give us all what we deserve to hear from you. I do not think I'm worthy of being here with you, so I'll step aside.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for braving the ill weather and coming to be a part of this. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I wish to thank Jeff for performing these tasks. It's an act of reparations. We were in first form at CP back then, and he was the class captain, and he never picked me. So I've carried that, Jeff, for all of these decades. You were not selecting on merit. I wish to thank my friend and comrade David for presenting the analysis in this book with utter precision and precisely as I sought to write it. You understood, you summarized, you paraphrased, and you presented, and I wish to thank you for that. It's not an easy task to go through a manuscript and summarize with precision, and I thank you for that. Thank you. It was Shakespeare who said that once in a blue moon, a writer receives a direction from above. That's what he said. For me, it came in June last year when Wisden Cricket Magazine, the editor of Wisden Magazine, Mr. Booth, called from London and said, this is the centenary of Frank Worrell. Frank Worrell would be 100 years old on Emancipation Day, August 1st. That's when he was born, August 1st, 1924. And we at Wisden, and you know Wisden is the cricket Bible, so to speak, of world cricket. He said, we at Wisden, we believe that Frank Worrell has not been treated fairly in terms of his contribution to world cricket and also to the world of democracy. And could you give us 3 pages for the August edition of Wisden? I gave him 3 pages, and then the 3 pages became 300 pages. Because those 3 pages were so stimulating to capture the journey of this phenomenal human being that I became, I would say, not obsessed, but maybe addicted into the research. It was a very strange experience because I found myself dreaming about Frank Worrell. He entered my dreams on 3 occasions. It was as if he was telling me what to write. But when you're an artist and you have that experience, it is strange, I should tell you. It's the subject matter is so deeply in your subconscious that you find yourself having these extraordinary conversations in your dreams. So this started in that way. But it gave me an opportunity also to reflect on my first encounter with Frank Worrell. When he died, Jeff, we were about 11 years old also. But my grandmother, who was the Pentecostal preacher in Redmond Village, she was an absolute diehard Frank Worrell person. She believed in Frank Worrell. She loved cricket. She loved Frank Worrell. But critically, she loved his politics. She loved his politics. It was an official funeral, as you all know, a state funeral. And she decided that she is going to crash this official funeral, and I am going to come with her. So we walked from Bagatelle, Redmond Village, across Prior Park, down here to Cave-Hill, and stood behind the barbed wire and the barricade and watched this official funeral of all of these regional, international celebrities and dignitaries who had come to pay respect to Frank Worrell. So we were there peeping through the bushes. And the memory of that moment came back when, in this very building, 40 years later, I'm in here inaugurating the Frank Worrell Memorial Lecture and inviting Michael Manley to come here in this building to give the first memorial lecture. And he and Frank were both born in the same year. Michael Manley, 1924, Frank Worrell, 1924. The book, as David has said, at one level is a very sad and painful narrative, because this is a man who knew no peace. From a child, he knew no peace. So I start with Frank Worrell as a young boy in high school here in Barbados at Combermere. He himself wrote about his turbulence as a student, his inability to accept the curriculum, the colonial curriculum. He was always having disturbances with his teachers. He was always in the principal's room being caned. I think he mentioned that he was caned about 20 times by the time he had got to third form. He was always in trouble with his teachers because he could not accept what he was being told. It was simply that he had a phenomenal intellectual gift. He was one of those children who had a remarkable ability to comprehend complex issues as a child. From time to time, we meet people like that, and he was one of those. So he was probably a victim of that DNA that bubbles up through our history, because the question you have to ask, which I've always been asking, what happened during slavery? And all black people just had to cut sugar canes every day. What happened to the brilliant ones? We have a monument here on the campus called Quall's Quest. And this little African boy arrived in Barbados. He was a child. The slave traders had raided his village, grabbed the adults, put them on chains, put them on the boat. Some were massacred. But in those days, they would have left the children because they didn't want children. But somehow they picked him up and threw him on the slave ship. And the ship arrived here, and he was bought at the auction on Carlisle's Bay. And the man who bought him had a child of the same age and he wanted a toy to play with his child. So he bought this child and took him home. And then realized that the boy was a mathematical genius. Now, that was when all hell broke loose, because he became now a circus clown, where he would invite his friends, the planter, to the house, and they would bring out this young quaw, and he would say, 459,000 multiplied by 384,000. And the little kid was scratched and says, 2.75 million. Now, so Frank was a part of a long tradition of children coming up through the oppression with phenomenal intellectual capacity. And our history is filled with that. So when he leaves school, and as you heard, he was already playing cricket for Barbados and was already extraordinary cricketer. By the time he was in third form, everyone said he was a protege. He was highly unusual because no 13-year-old child should be able to bat like that. He could bowl spin, he could bowl fast, he could catch everything. He knew everything. And he was a child. So, what would happen to children in a colonial context, such as the 1930s and 40s? So he finishes school, and everyone expected him to go and join one of the established cricket clubs. He was certainly not going to join Spartan, because Spartan was the club for brown-skinned men with curly hair. He was not going to be, as Wes Hall would say, he was not going to be the nappy-haired boy in the curly-hair cricket team. So that was out. He was not ready for empire because the formative years, it had a reputation for the aspiring, respectable black professional people. And he wasn't ready for that yet either. So we heard from Clyde Walcott what he did, because Clyde Walcott's father took him out of Combermere at third form because he felt that Combermere was becoming too proletarianized, too radical. Yes, you had young George Lamon there 2 years ahead of Frank, but Combermere was hosting a kind of black intellectual enlightenment, and you were seeing it in the kids. So his father took him out and put him into Harrison's College, where he could socialize effectively with the white Barbados elite. So when he finished school, he would be assured a job in Bridgetown in one of the corporations. And his father was very visionary because that's exactly what happened. He finished high school, got a very good job at Barbados Shipping and Trading, which was a white supremacy institution, and then later on became West Indies Cricket Board of Control president, and later ICI president. And I give you that narrative to help you to understand why he is not in the photograph leading Frank's casket out of the church. The 3 W's were seen as an unbreakable bond of 3 men who constituted the greatest batsmen in the world. There's no literature that speaks about any internal contest between the 3 of them, but I kept asking, and I asked Clyde, Sir Clyde, when he was appointed the ICC president, I said, Sir Clyde, this photograph, taken as the casket is coming out of the church, Everton is leading the casket. with Tom Pierce, who was one of the school teachers of Frank Worrell. And then there is the Frank Worrell team. There's Sobers, there's Canai, West Hall, Sober. This is Sir Frank's boys. So I said, but why are you not in this photograph? Why were you not leading the casket of the great W? And we have him on record. He said, I was not invited. We have him on record. Not surprisingly, because while Frank was laying the foundation for this struggle, he had taken Everton under his wing. Everton had no high school education. Brilliant. Clyde was a high school Harrison graduate. He had gone into the corporate world. And the West Indies Cricket Board had chosen him to be the first black captain if there had to be one. In other words, if there was going to be a moment where we need to have a democracy captain, it would not be Frank Worrell. The board had declared war on Frank Worrell. They had chosen Clyde as the person who will perform that role. And he was made vice captain twice in those years of white leadership. So he was being groomed through that narrative. That is the background that tells you something about this war that Frank Worrell was leading. So Clyde was not invited because he was seen as a Trojan horse figure. He was seen as the one that would be used to stab Frank in the back. And though they were so close, but Frank understood those politics. And in his own writing, he would make it very clear. He said, Clyde was my good friend. And he wrote, but he was not invited to the funeral. Now, when Frank finished high school, he formed his own cricket team. He formed his own cricket team. So he's 16 years old and he forms his own cricket team. What kind of child is going to go and form his own cricket team? And what did he call his cricket team? He called it the Starvation 11. So this child is going around Barbados in the villages in the countryside playing against the poor people in the villages. The Starvation 11. And why did he call it the Starvation 11? Because he grew up listening to Clement Payne in Bank Hall in the 1937 revolution, where all across this Caribbean, the International Workers' Song was performed before the rallies. And the International Socialist Song, as it was called, was written in 1884. And the Caribbean Workers' Movement took that song, integrated it into their campaign. And in Jamaica, Barbados, they will sing the song before the speaker comes on the platform. Arise, ye starvelings. Arise, ye the wretched of the earth. The time has come for justice. The time has come for fairness. Arise, ye starvelings. Now, so the young boy calls his cricket team the Starvation 11. And that gives you immediately a sense of this person who you are talking about. Socialized, radicalized, very precise in his thinking as a child. Now, he leaves Barbados shortly after his cricket debut. The war had intervened, so there was no international cricket for a while during the war. So, 48, and he is now a superstar. Immediately on entry, you heard the statistics. But he leaves Barbados. And he's clear, I cannot accept the power of and the hegemony of white domination in Barbados. I can't live with it. I cannot live with it, and I will not live with it. And he goes to Trinidad, looking for peace to escape the white racism. He goes to Trinidad, as did George Lamin. As did George Lamin, who could not take it either. He too goes to Trinidad and gets a job as a teacher in a high school. But Frank realized that going to Trinidad was jumping from the frying pan into the fire. He realized that immediately and said, I have to get out of here. Because the West Indies Cricket Board of Control was under the total domination of a gentleman called Sir Errol dos Santos, who was the richest man in Trinidad, the most powerful white man in Trinidad. Even Eric Williams, in those early years, was afraid to cross dos Santos. He had control over the corporate sector. He was a director of almost every company in the country. He had been knighted by the King of England, and he had authority over the governor. Even the governor of the colony was afraid of Errol dos Santos. And Frank goes into Trinidad, looks around, plays some cricket, meets some people, and then he realized that there's a Barbados-Trinidad axis. The Goddards of Barbados, the Stolmars of Trinidad, they were a class of people who were in total control of the West Indies Cricket Board, and Frank had to get out of there. So he says, I will try Jamaica. And off he goes to Jamaica as a young man. Not many people knew, even today, that George Headley, who was the greatest batsman probably in the world, that he was Frank Worrell's cousin. Because George Headley's father was from Barbados, went to work on the Panama Canal, met a Jamaican girl, had a son, and that was George Headley. And George Headley knew that his father and Frank Worrell's family was one family. So he goes to Jamaica, and George Headley, who had been the victim of the West Indies Cricket Board of Control, the absolute victim, but who did not have the skills to do anything about it. There were people who were trying to fight the battle for George Headley. But George Headley had this incredible role to play also, because when we went to England for the first West Indies tour in 1930, George Headley was a teenager, but he was the best batsman in the West Indies. He had proven it with phenomenal performances in the regional competition, but he was not selected. The reason given by the West Indies Cricket Board of Control why he was not selected to go to England was that when the men go out to drink at night, who's going to babysit this child? That was because the Englishmen and the white West Indians would go to the pub and drink because they were playing what Larry Constantine called cousin cricket. The white West Indians and the white Englishmen were playing cousin cricket, and they were having a good time. Go to the pub in the evening, drink some beer, and what are we going to do with this child? But that was not the reason. The reason was that in West Indies cricket culture at the time, batting was seen as the gentleman's art. The batsmen were white. It was a gentleman's art. The bowlers were black because bowling was agricultural labor. So the young, strong black men would run in all day in the hot sun and perform agricultural labor while the white batsmen would stay in the slips and be the captains. And you had this racial division of labor as you did on the plantations. And George Helly was turning that paradigm on its head because now you're going to have a 19-year-old black boy who's the best batsman in the team. So he was challenging, his very presence was a challenge to the division of labor. But Frank was clear. He said, well, I will lay my foundation in Jamaica. Jamaica will be my base. And he gave a reason. He said, Jamaica is going to be my base. Because in Barbados, the brown-skinned colored people who had influence and who were growing in influence had thrown in their lot with the white upper class. So there was a bond between the brown people and the white people in Barbados against the black people. But in Jamaica, he said, the brown middle class and professional people had split. And there was a tremendous amount of support among the brown, professional, property-owning people that they threw their support behind the black people in the search for justice. So like the Manley families, Norman Manley and Buster Manty and Michael Manley, all of these, the Sherlock families, all of these very rich and prominent brown people threw their lot behind the black struggle. And Frank felt he has some space inside of there to maneuver. So he became a citizen of Jamaica. He became the captain of Jamaica. And I want you to imagine Jamaica versus Barbados. And the Jamaica team arrives at Kensington to play against Barbados, and Frank is the Jamaican captain. And their own genius boys on the other side. And I want you to understand how the public reacted to that. Many people thought that Frank would have been booed. But the description of that game, that there was silence. Because the Bajans were contemplating what is going on. That Frank has come back to us as the captain of Jamaica. And beaten the hell out of Barbados. Now, Frank, however, made a statement. I think some journalists in The Advocate had provoked him and gave Frank the opportunity to lay down his first political statement on the question of who we are. And he said, stop the nonsense. Stop the nonsense. Barbados, Jamaica. The slave ship dropped some in Barbados. The Chilean slave ship went to Jamaica. And we are the same people, dropping different places. So stop this inter-island nonsense. One people, one Caribbean, stop this inter-island nonsense. And Frank laid down that very clear as a young man. So he's in Jamaica. But where does he go? He goes down in the ghetto. The heart of West Kingston, Trenchtown, the poorest of the poor. And he go and plays cricket for Boys Town. He's not playing for the Kingston club, which is like Spartan. He's not playing for Melbourne, which is like Empire. He is playing for a ghetto club with illiterate, barefooted boys. So you see the movement from the Starvation 11 as a teenager to playing for the poorest of the poor in Jamaica and winning the national competition for Boys Town. And the narratives, you know, I speak of this spooky spiritual dimension. I went to Sabina Park a few days ago to watch the test match. And I'm sitting next to an elderly gentleman. You know, usually when I go to cricket, I don't want to talk because I'm in the laboratory and I'm examining. I'm at work. But I'm speaking to this gentleman. And he looked at me and he said, I've heard you have written a book on Sir Frank Worrell. I said, yes. I said, who are you, sir? He said, I am the president of Boys Town Cricket Club. Wow, wow, wow. When Frank came to us from Barbados, and he came to us in Trenchtown, down at Bob Marley's place, he said, I was assigned to him as his valet. I was 12 years old, and the president of Boys Town says, when Frank drives in, you go and take his bags out of the car, take them to the changing room. When Frank is leaving, you escort his car, open the gate that Frank goes through. So he was doing those services for Frank Worrell. And here I am now sitting next to this man who is the current president of Boys Town. You made reference, David, to this godlike character. Those poor people in Trenchtown saw him as not human. He was a God figure. They would not even allow him to drive his car out of the car park. You know what those kids used to do? Frank would get in his car at the end of a game, he'd turn the engine, and 15, 16 kids would push Frank's car out of the car park, through the gate, and said, bye, Frank. They would push his car out of the car park into the main road. Because he was not, they had never met anyone like that, okay? So Frank is in Jamaica, and he's laying the foundation for the big struggle. This is the big one now. But importantly, it wasn't just the poor people who saw him that way. The two great legends of West Indies cricket who were still very much involved in 1948. George Headley, Larry Constantine. Both of them said, the Messiah has come. Because there were the prophets, there were the two greats, but they lacked the skill set, the consciousness to fight the war. But now the Messiah has come. He, Frank Worrell, who they embraced, because then they were in their 40s and 50s, and this guy was like 21, 22, 23. The Messiah has come. And that was the job that Frank had. Now, let us talk about strategy. Fidel Castro had presented Caribbean people with a choice. If you want to end colonization, you have to pick up arms and fight against it. So Fidel led the revolution, gave Caribbean people a choice. You can go the revolutionary path, or you can go the reform democracy path. Now, Frank embraced that path, and that was going to be his model in contrast to the Fidel model. So he insisted on being paid £250 to go to tour India in the 49 series. You heard he had just emerged as the greatest batsman in the West Indies, and it was assumed that he would lead the batting in India, but he refused. He told them, listen, I don't have a plantation, I don't have a merchant house, I don't have stocks, I don't have bonds, I don't have shares. My mother is in the US struggling. I have two younger siblings. One younger sibling I have to take care, and I need a salary. Don't give me a stipend. Give me I need something. Give me £250. And they told him to know his place. Errol de Santos told him, young man, know your place. Okay? So, Frank does not want to turn his back on the Caribbean people. He don't want to turn his back on the team. And he writes a letter to say to the president, "Dear Mr. President, I wish to advise that I'm no longer available for the West Indies tour to India because I have been accepted into Manchester University to pursue a degree in economics and public administration." That is how Frank dealt with that. Off he goes to England. He's now a student. Right? He had done well at Combermere and had matriculated. So the board could not say that he had turned his back on the team. They had to say the young man is pursuing his education, and Frank knew that the public of the Caribbean would endorse that. So he makes his first move. Why does he go to Manchester University? Of all the universities in England, this is where it gets very interesting. A young West Indian economic genius at London, Arthur Lewis, Professor Dr. Arthur Lewis, had applied for the professorship of economics at the University of Liverpool. Was interviewed like everyone else. The interviewing panel offered Arthur Lewis the job, first professor, black professor in Britain. The Vice Chancellor received the recommendation from the interviewing panel, and he responded by saying, "There are no black professors in a British university. None. And Liverpool University will not be the first to have one," and denied the recommendation of the interviewing panel. When that denial struck the news, and the Vice Chancellor was being accused of practicing racism and all of that, it was in the British media. The Vice Chancellor at Manchester University, embarrassed by this, made contact with Arthur Lewis and said, "We are willing to create a post for a professor in macroeconomics, and please could you come to become our professor of macroeconomics?" And that is how Arthur Lewis gets to Manchester. And if you go to Manchester University now, there's a massive building up there. Arthur Lewis, first black man, first black scholar to receive a Nobel Prize in economics. Liverpool has to live that down, and Arthur Lewis becomes a legend, and Arthur Lewis makes contact with Frank Worrell and said, "I know what you're going through. Come to Manchester and apply to do your degree in my faculty." So Frank is now in Manchester in the Faculty of Social Science, where Arthur Lewis, who became our first Vice Chancellor at UWI, was professor. And that created a phenomenal bridge. Two young men, one in his late 30s, professor, the other in his mid-20s, he's going to be a scholar, and they become very close. But that's the bond that put Frank Worrell in touch with the leading intellectuals in Britain, the people in the Pan-Africanist movement, the people in the socialist movement. Young Nkrumah he met, who went home to Ghana and threw the British out of Ghana and gave Ghana its independence. Frank Worrell is surrounded now by all of these intellectual people who want decolonization. They're anti-colonial, they're anti-racist. So he is in an intellectual sphere with white scholars, black scholars, Indian people, and Frank Worrell is now in a space that is not cricket. That's not cricket. So while he's there as a student, one of the clubs in Lancashire outside of Manchester approached him and said, Frank, we are going to give you £500 to come and play a few matches for us. So he's now playing cricket for this club, receiving £500 for a few matches, and the West Indies Cricket Board of Control refused him £200. So Frank now has enough money. He now have enough money to organize himself as a politician, as an activist, to get on the train, go down to London, meet the West Indian community, have town hall meetings, to do all kinds of things. He has the money to do this because the £500 for a few matches was not even his salary. He was making many, many times more by just playing exhibition matches, and they would give him £1,000, and that was a lot of money in those days. So Frank became financially stable and comfortable as a young man. Sends for his girlfriend, brings her up to Manchester, they get married, and blah, blah, blah. Now, each move that Frank made in the next 8 years was carefully crafted. Because he didn't go to India on that 49 tour, the Indian people were feeling a bit peeved, you know, because Clyde had gone, shown his skills. Everton had scored 4 consecutive centuries in India. But we have Clyde, we have Everton. Why can't we see this genius boy called Frank Worrell? Is it he don't like Indian people? What is it? And the rumor in India that he was not inclined to be among Indian people. So Frank had to correct that. And how does he correct it? Well, the war is over, and the King of England said, we're going to play some goodwill matches in India. Okay? And I will select a cricket team to represent me, the king, to go to India to play goodwill matches. One of Frank Worrell's newly found friends in Manchester, Duckworth, is the captain. They become good friends. So Duckworth says, Frank, we want you to captain the team. So here is Frank Worrell, now the captain of an all-white cricket team, under the auspices of the King of England, and he's in India. So the Indian people get to know him, to meet him. He played some remarkable innings in India, and now the Indian people are in love with Frank Worrell. The king is in love with him too. Everybody loves Frank Worrell because he is crafting. Well, by the way, I've always wondered, if you listen to a tape of Frank Worrell, he has an English upper-class accent. Where did he get this English upper-class accent? People in England send their children to elocution classes, boarding schools, to acquire that upper-class English sound. And that's how Frank Worrell spoke. Now, David, I should tell you, George Lamond spoke the same way. So where did these two young guys out of Colonialism get this elite English accent that so fascinated the British aristocracy, so fascinated by this twa, 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 twa? So that was Frank's first move. But his masterstroke was, I believe, 1951. As you know, the big tour is to England in 50. This is a showdown. Because we had never defeated England in England. But Frank Worrell had not played for the West Indies for a year and a half. So he writes to the board to announce that he has received leave of absence from the Vice-Chancellor, and he's available for the English tour. And the letter is very interesting. The Vice-Chancellor says, Mr. Worrell, it's an honor to give you leave of absence for 3 months to represent your nation. So Frank is now, he's not given West Indian people the chance to say that he's... So, we're playing against England, and of course, that is the series where the three W's, led by Frank Worrell, they devastated England. Frank Worrell was at his best, back in the team, re-establishing that he is indispensable, because if you're going to have a struggle, you have to be out there. So Frank super performed on that English tour, and now established himself. He's angry, however, when they returned from England, having won that series, and two things happened that upset Frank Worrell. The Barbados Cricket Association is discussing the captaincy of the Barbados cricket team for the regional competition, and Everton Weekes was recommended to be the Barbados captain. They've never had a black captain, but Everton Weekes had been described by Wisden Cricket magazine as now the best batsman in the world, having scored 5 consecutive hundreds in tests, a record that stands to this day. 80 years later, no cricketer has ever scored 5 centuries consecutively in test cricket. Stands. He comes home, but he's not the hero. It is John Goddard, the captain, who is the hero. When the BCA was discussing the nomination of Everton Weekes, someone in that room, I'm not going to give the name right now, someone in that board meeting said, okay, which of our high schools did he go to? Didn't go to Harrison, didn't go to Lodge, didn't go to Combermere, never attended high school, and he's going to captain Barbados and captain white Barbadian cricketers? Hell no. That was the end of Everton. Never captained the Barbados team until he had retired from Test cricket in 1958. Had to wait 8 years. The man, classified as the greatest batsman in the world, never got a chance to captain his country. Frank was very upset. Very, very upset. Then Frank was upset by how the newspapers covered the English story. So the West Indies team is out there, and all of you know that we won that series because of the 3 W's with the bat and Ramadan and Valentine with the ball. So the Indian people, the black people, shown their skills, but the story was, in the media, from the Gleaner to the Advocate, it shows that the colonial model still works. The colonial model, that a white man can lead 10 black players on the field and they can defeat England. So that concept of leadership is alive and well. So what does this talk about independence? What independence? The colonial thing is working. Here, cricket has proven that the white man in charge, taking responsibility for guiding black people and Indian people who have skills but can't think. They have skills but they can't think. The model still works. Leave it alone. And that was the argument made in Barbados. So we go to Australia in 51, the following year, and this is the showdown, because West Indies had defeated India, had defeated England, and now we go to Australia 51 for the big clash. And Goddard is still the captain. Cannot make the team as a batsman, cannot make it as a bowler, but he makes it as the captain. So we go to Australia 51, and the Australians destroyed us. 4-1, 5 test matches, and we lost 4 of them. Humiliated. And this, David, is where Frank Worrell started to write. Frank Worrell wrote a series of essays on that tour. And the first one, he said, well, When we were in England in 50, all of us used to go to the captain and give him ideas. Captain, try this. Captain, try that. Captain, try this. And all of us were giving the captain all these ideas, and he was saying, yes, thank you very much, thank you very much. He implemented them. West Indies won the series because of this upsurge of knowledge from the players given the captain. But the media says, no, it was the captain's brilliance who won the series. So they go to Australia, and the fellows decide, well, we have nothing to say to the captain. He is the big superhero. Let him figure it out for himself. Frank Worrell said, I used to feel in the gully close to the captain to give him advice. He said, on the tour, I went to Fine Leg. Frank Worrell was fielding at Fine Leg, as far away from the captain on the field as possible. So there's no request for information, what to do next. And all of the players backed away. The team collapsed, and we came home in disgrace. And Frank wrote about it. He said there was one occasion when a pair of batsmen put on 280 partnership. And I come in the breakfast hall, and the captain walked right past me in the breakfast hall. I'm standing there about to say, good morning, captain. And he looked me in the face and he walked right past me. So now for the rest of the tour, the captain is not talking to his best player. So Frank writes about these things. We have his essays that he wrote about all of these technical issues. And you could see why he realized what was going to happen next. He said the West Indian cricketers, in one of his essays, have become calypso cricketers, happy-go-lucky. They're out there, they're swinging their bat, they don't care, they don't give a damn about anything. And that's how the world is seeing our cricketers. Entertainers, no brain, just skill but no brain. And Frank wrote an essay in which he said, you know, these young boys, with guidance and training, can become the best cricketers the world has ever seen. But what they need is mentoring, they need care, they need guidance, they need help. And with this, he said, I am going to make the argument for independence. Well, why is the cricketer making the argument for independence? Because the answer is quite clear. You all black people in the Caribbean, you're all not ready to handle your own affairs. You're all not ready for the world of governance and international relations and foreign policy. You're not ready for this. Frank Worrell said, I will use cricket as an example of the lack of truth in that statement. I will use cricket. So while Eric Williams is talking about independence in Norman Manley and Jamaica and Burnham, while the politicians are talking about it on the platforms, Frank Worrell is saying, I will show the proof that indeed we are ready to lead our own affairs. Because give me these youngsters from all across the Caribbean, and I will put them out there, and I will take care of them, and we will beat every cricket team in the world, and we will make the evidence. Here is the proof. Here is the proof that West Indians are ready for independence. They can manage their own affairs. And Frank Worrell set out to accomplish this. And he did succeed magnificently, because when he became the captain, that's exactly what he did. And David, let me have a little crossfire with you on that CRLR James issue. Not a difference, just a nuance. In 1959, on the English tour to the Caribbean, and remember, after we defeated England in 1950, the English felt so humiliated. They went into the drawing room to come up with a strategy. This must never happen again. Those West Indians must never again come to this country and defeat us at home here. It must never happen again. They came up with their strategies. They beat us badly in '54, the return tour. They massacred us. That was the tour in which Freddie Truman told them, fire with fire. Then we went to England in '57. Goddard had retired from cricket. They brought back Goddard out of retirement to lead the West Indies team rather than give it to Frank Worrell. Frank Worrell will never captain the West Indies. The Santos made it very clear that uppity nigger boy will never lead the West Indies team. So they humiliate him, but Frank goes, takes his humiliation and perform with the bat. Hundreds. There was one test match where Frank Worrell opened the bowling and opened the batting in the same match because he was the best fast bowler they had. And he was their best batsman, so he opened the bowling, opened the batting. And this is when West Hall made a statement that I watched that man. A man bowl all day. When we got back in the changing room and Frank took off his shoes, all the blood was dripping from his socks. He bowled all day and bat all the next day and won that match. Now, so Goddard is the captain again. The English humiliated us again. Frank Worrell is now at the end of the line. The English come back in '59 to beat us again. And they did beat us again. 3 in a row. But when they got to Trinidad, the Trinidad people threw bottles on the field and said, no Worrell, no cricket. No Worrell, no cricket. So Port of Spain, Queen's Park is now a riot zone. Umpire called off the game because it wasn't safe with all the bottles flying around the place. But the crowd is saying, no Worrell, no cricket. Now, the board is now boxed into a corner. It was at that stage that James got involved. In fact, C.L.R. James admitted I was in my hotel packing my bags to catch a flight to England. And I turned on the radio and heard that there's a riot at Queen's Park. And he stopped the packing, and he admitted it, got a taxi, went down, saw the riot, and started writing about cricket. This is a disgrace what they've done to Frank Worrell. And he wrote a series of essays. Fine. But David, as you know, the masters had already spoken. No Worrell, no cricket. In fact, the captain of the West Indies cricket team, Jerry Alexander, in his letter of resignation, he said, the Caribbean has become infected with a virus called Worrellitis. All of us are now infected with this Worrellitis, and I'm sorry to say, but I too am now infected with it, because I too believe that the man who I was a part of the strategy to deny, I do believe that Worrell should be the captain, and I would be honored to become his vice captain. He too had Worrellitis. So when James was writing the very inflammatory essays in favor of Worrell, the matter was already settled. The board had already agreed because 3 things had taken place. The Jamaica director on the board, Mr. Nettlesoul, had already gone to the board meeting and declared to the president that we are coming from Jamaica with a resolution that Frank Worrell shall captain the West Indies team from here on in. Ken Wishart from Guyana had written to the president and said, and I will second that resolution. And the coalition had been formed. So when the president called the board meeting, the president refused to sit in that meeting. So Dos Santos, rather than go to the meeting and say the majority of directors want Frank, he refused to go to the board meeting. He said, I will not sit in the chair of the presidency of the West Indies Cricket Board of Control that will make Frank Worrell captain. And he refused to attend. The meeting was held while the Georgetown match at Border was taking place. The players are out on the field, the game is going on, the board is meeting upstairs, and the board made the decision that Frank Worrell is the next captain while the game is going on. The captain was not pleased how it was done, but Frank Worrell was appointed captain while the game was going on, with an existing captain out on the field. And who chaired that board meeting? A gentleman by the name of Felix Dare chaired that meeting of the West Indies Cricket Board because Dos Santos had made his view very clear. So that was the end of the Dos Santos rule. So Frank Worrell and Dos Santos had that 10-year battle, which resulted in Dos Santos resigning the presidency and Frank Worrell becoming the captain. So Worrell was advised not to comment on any of this. He made no statements, but he was writing his essays. After the end of every tour, Frank wrote a number of commentaries on why we lost, why we won. And you can read in those commentaries intellectual capacity of this brilliant man. So, as you heard, we go to Australia, then we come home, but now we're going back to England in 1963, and C.R. James flip-flop. But if you knew C.R. James, C.R. James had one of the most brilliant intellectual minds you can imagine. But you can never have a conversation with C.R. James. You're talking to C.R. James and it's a monologue. He's telling you what to think, what to do. He's telling you, it's not, I make a statement, you make a statement, I make a statement, we have a dialogue. It's a monologue with C.R. James. And I have never met a human being in my life who I so deeply respected, but at the same time was disgusted by how he spoke to people. And that is why the timing is important. We're going to England. Eric Williams has finally purged the P&M of C.R. James. He told C.R. James, you are no longer welcome in the People's National Movement. You're out. In fact, we're considering bringing charges against you for unapproved use of funds. That you've been using our funds for yourself and your wife, and we have not seen the results. James was in the hotel packing to go to England because Eric Williams had kicked him out, and that was the end of James's political career as far as Trinidad was concerned. So, we're going to England 63. James now writes a campaign letter which says, Worrell must not lead the West Indies team to England in 63. He's 39 years old and he must go. And he said very explicitly, I argued for him in 59. I said, Worrell is the man. But here we are now, I'm saying Worrell must go. Under no circumstances whatsoever shall Worrell be allowed to lead the West Indies team to England in 63. And the letters are aggressive. David, the letters for Worrell paled in significance to the letter against Worrell in 63. And bear in mind what is going on. James thought that Eric Williams had become a megalomaniac. Eric Williams have total control over his party. He's kicked me out. I am the victim of Eric Williams' machinations. So having been kicked out, he saw Frank Worrell becoming an Eric Williams. Now, Frank Worrell now has so much control over his players. He now have so much control over the board that Frank Worrell is going to become like Eric Williams, a dictator. And he moved against Frank Worrell on the basis that he will become a dictator, which is not good. And he said, this is the problem in history. Many men who have led great movements, at the height of the movement, when they should move on and pass the baton, they stay on and become dictators and destroy the same movement that they supported, because men do not know when to give up power. And they become dictators. And this was Eric Williams. I remember when he wrote the book on the Haitian Revolution, that's what he said. That the revolution almost failed because Toussaint Louverture, who had led the enslaved people, became a dictator. He didn't know when to hand over the power to the next generation, and he became a dictator. So this is the ideological issue, David, that James now has to cope with, how dictators are created. And he said the same thing, as you know, about Stalin. The Russian Revolution, he said, will fail. It will fail because Stalin has become a dictator. So that was how he was perceiving Frank Worrell. Eric Williams told Frank Worrell not to respond. All the political leaders in the Caribbean had agreed that James had lost his mind on this one. Don't respond to any of it. And Frank Worrell never did. Went to England and turned it around. Won for us, put us back up there. And then he came back and he said, well, yes, now I can retire because I have broken the back of the situation. And these young boys that I have trained, these young boys, Sobers and Hall and Kanai and Kuru, all these young boys, these are the best cricketers in the world, and they will beat anybody because they are well trained. Now, why did I use the revolutionary word? It wasn't my concept. Frank Worrell, imagine this, and this is where I'm going to end. Frank Worrell has defeated England. It's the end of his line. He's upstairs in the changing room, lying on the floor, just relaxing. There are 10,000 people out there shouting, Frank, Frank, we want Frank, 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 we want Frank. All the English crowds out there want to say farewell to Frank Worrell. And they are begging him to come on the balcony. All the players are drinking the champagne and it's bubbly everywhere, and Frank is lying on the floor in the changing room. And they're begging him, the crowd, that please come out and let us wave goodbye to Frank. So Ian Wooldridge, a BBC journalist, found his way up the stairs and into the changing room, and he knew Frank, and he begged Frank to come and say goodbye. Frank gave him an interview, and that interview is the last interview that Frank gave as captain of the West Indies team. The transcript of that interview, he said, what I need now, this is what Frank said, what I need now is solace. I have come to the end of my struggle. What I need now is solace, peace. So he don't want to wave, he don't want to drink champagne, he don't want to celebrate, he's just lying there on the floor. And he said, well, you know, there are people back home who were all wishing that I would fail. And of course he was right, because the West Indies Cricket Board were waiting. If Frank had lost those matches, they were going to turn this ship around and reinstate the old model. The rumor was that a white Barbadian cricketer, a very good cricketer, Robin Bino, was going to be catapulted into the captaincy of the West Indies team to restore the old model. He said, I know there are people back home who were wishing that I would fail, but we will not fail because these young cricketers who I have trained, you cannot fool them, you cannot mislead them, because they have been thoroughly prepared for the future. He was talking about Sobers and he said, I have groomed them, trained them. You cannot fool them. You can never turn back what we have done. And that is how you define a revolution. A revolution is a major change that cannot be reversed. The West Indies Cricket Board of Control will never reverse what we have achieved and done. Because these boys are the best cricketers in the world, and that is what he said. We're going to go home, we're going to play against Australia for the world title, and these young boys are now ready. They will beat anyone. So Frank put all of his experience on the line. He recommended Sobers to be the captain. Interesting choice. The board was very partial to Comrade Hunt. But later on, Frank explained why he had made his choice. He said, I have no doubt that Comrade Hunt will make a great captain. I have no doubt of that. He's a gentleman. He had a good education. He's already a respected speaker because Comrade Hunt had joined the moral rearmament movement, and he was getting ready for a career in moral philosophy and moral politics. He will make a great captain, I have no doubt. He said, however, there are two issues I must consider. One, to beat the strongest team in the world requires tactics. Tactics. On-the-moment tactics. He said, that young Sobers boy, he might be one of the youngest boys on the team, but he has a cricket brain that is unparalleled. And the tactics of that young boy, that's what we need to beat Australia. Then he said, well, remember what they did to Everton. What high school did he go to become a captain? Sobers never went to no high school. And he said, I am going to make sure that the leadership of the most important institution in the Caribbean at this time, a working class boy with no secondary education from the ghetto, and going forward, we are looking for the best talent wherever we can find them. So I'm going to drive the captaincy right down into the grassroots of Caribbean society. Sobers, no high school, but brilliant mind. And that is how Frank justified, and boy was he correct. Sobers beat the hell out of Australia. Beat the hell out of Australia. Because Frank read it correctly, and he was there to make sure it happened. So what Frank did was to complete the democratization of an aspect of Caribbean society. The captaincy and leadership coming from the planters, the merchants, the professional middle class, and it goes all the way down to the grassroots of society. And that was what Frank wanted to prove. And furthermore, to prove that when you go to the grassroots and you find the best people and you train them, there is nothing you cannot achieve. And that was the argument for independence. That was the argument, that we have skills in all parts of our society. And once we mobilize them, we train them, we educate them, the results will be phenomenal. That is why Frank, when he retired, came home to UWI. Because there was a rumor in Barbados that Frank Worrell would walk Broad Street and beg bread. That was the corporate response. He had taken away from us the right to be the leaders of West Indies cricket. He will walk Broad Street and beg bread. So Arthur Lewis, his same friend from 20 years earlier, his professor, coincidence, that professor from Manchester is now the vice chancellor of UWI. And Sir Arthur Lewis says, when you are retired, come home. Don't let people mess with you about whether you will get a job or not. No, none of that. You will come to UE and do for our students what you have done for that cricket team. Confidence and all of that. So Frank Worrell got the job as Director of Student Services, mentor, inspirational leader for the student body. Sadly, he goes to the University of Punjab in northern India to receive an honorary doctorate, gave an inspiring lecture to the student body. The Prime Minister said, you know, Frank, you have to do that lecture in 4 other universities. I want all the students in India to hear this. Then he wasn't feeling very well. He felt sick. He said he wants to go home. He cut the trip short, took him back to Jamaica, took him to the hospital. The medical faculty, they were all there. They pull out all the stops, examine him, and said, Frank, well, it's leukemia, and it's bad. Maybe 2 weeks at most. So he died on the campus in the medical faculty hospital. So he sat on his bed. He had told the nurse to bring his breakfast on the balcony. He sat on the balcony looking up at the mountains. When the nurse came back, he hadn't eaten his breakfast. He said, I want to lie down. And he went into his bed. She took the tray out, put it on the trolley, and when she came back, Frank was gone. Now that is a sad story. That's a very, very sad story. But if you, like my grandmother, I returned to her, she just said, well, God gave him to us for a reason. He has fulfilled it, so God has called him back. And that was her analysis. 42 years old, and he was gone. This book, I think, tries to do justice to what Frank had done. He was a special human being, a phenomenal person. Everyone recognized that. Who recommended him for the knighthood? After he had played in Australia, the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Menzies, said to him at the airport, Frank, the next time we meet, I shall be calling you Sir Frank. Australia mobilized its political things, got the message down to Buckingham Palace. Queen says, of course. And Frank becomes Sir Frank. And the Australian Cricket Board of Control said, well, from here on, for the rest of time, Australia and the West Indies will play for the Frank Worrell Trophy. And the opposition put Frank Worrell's name on that trophy. Now, you don't get any greater respect than that. On the field, off the field. When he returned to Jamaica from Australia, 60,000 school children, 60,000 school children in uniform were there to celebrate Frank. That was the nature of this prophet, visionary. Eric Williams, by then, had become Prime Minister of Trinidad. Eric Williams said there have been no greater man produced in the Caribbean. But James's final statement, I think it's a kind of apology for what he had said. He said, I have met 2 men in my life. Only 2. Classical James. I've only met 2 men in the whole world who, after an hour of conversation, I felt mentally and intellectually burnt up. I felt mentally, 2 people in the whole world. One, Trotsky, Leon Trotsky, leader of, intellectual of the Russian Revolution, and Frank Worrell. Two men in my whole life who exhausted my mind in conversation. Two men, Frank Worrell and Trotsky. That is what we're dealing with, and I hope you find the book useful. Thank you.
I would like you all to give Professor Hill-Beckles another big hand, please. Outstanding. Before we go on to the next aspect of it, Professor Beckles, I have lived long enough, after not picking your team, to see you hit a few runs here at this campus. I would just give a little time to develop a little better, and you've made it. Congratulations, my friend. Very well done. And I must always add, I must say thank you for guiding my wife during the 17 or 18 years she spent here with you. She's been guiding me for 49 now, I'm still behind time. Anyhow, at this time, I will invite some people. I don't know how we're going to do this here. Maybe have a professor for some book presentations. Yes, I do not know. I'll start first of all. If there's anybody here representing Sir Wes Hall, anybody representing him? No? Okay. Is there anybody representing Sir Charles Griffith? These are all Sir Frank's boys, so to speak. And anybody representing Cammy Smith? I know I was with Cammy a few months ago in Bayfield, and I know he's not 100%. So he's not getting around. He's in a wheelchair at the time. Well, as we started at the beginning, we will start now again. Ambassador, come forward, please. Sophie, sorry to interrupt your phone dealings there, but you got to come forward as well. Is anyone here representing the National Library Service? I will now invite the representative from the Sidney Martin Library. UWI Bookshop. Well, not yet. UWI Bookshop. Keep coming, keep coming. Okay. The Barbados Museum. I thought. Yeah, where you go? Oh, you come to him. He'll come to you. Okay, representative from the archives. Thank you. If this book were launched next year instead of this year, I'd be asking Professor Beckles to be presenting the book to the Brooms Library. But hasn't been formed as yet. Okay, at this time I would like to express some sincere thanks to a number of people. I cannot go forward without repeating myself. I give my sincere gratitude and thanks to Professor Beckles for your outstanding work. Congratulations to you. And I hope it's a success that it should be, not only because of your work, but in the honor of the great man, the revolutionary himself. So, secondly, I would like, Ambassador Commission, you gave us a lecture this evening. You touched on some areas, some of which I didn't even know, as a matter of fact. And I appreciate all you did, and I thank you for your perspective, because lots of times it's all about perspective. Your perspective was consistent with what this evening is all about. Thank you very much. I'd like also to thank Sophie Lee. Very good, very well presented. I think Mr. Ball will be proud of how you presented yourself this evening. Thank you. Nothing in this era could go on without a lot of making people feel comfortable. And I want to give thanks to UWI Security. UWI Security has made sure things have been run smoothly and all's in place. The UWI bookshop, I anticipate, I know it was called you to give you a book, well, the book, you should be selling these books, so you're not getting one. I expect you'll get a lot of them in there and make sure they keep flowing off the thing. And while you're doing that, let me put a personal plug. There's one coming called the the Barbados Cricket League, this impact on Barbados and West Indies cricket. I expect it to be sold in there as well, right? Campus Registrar's Office, I'm sure you would have done a lot of coordinating and stuff, and I want to thank you very much for all the work you've done in making sure tonight's function went off well. The Academy of Sport here at UE, I do not see the director. I thought he had been here. I read about him in today's paper. They got some elections coming out from the Barbados Cricket Association. I saw his name somewhere down there. I hope you saw mine too, by the way, folks. The UWITV and Marcoms and Campus IT, I want to thank all of you for the outstanding work, making sure that this is well presented and pushed into the public's eyes. So for everybody who's here, for you, people that came out, like Professor Beckles said at the beginning, that you braved the weather. This morning, it was tumbling down. I did not wait for a call. I called the dean, and he said, oh, I was about to call you because we are still going forward. I said, the weather's not going to bother me. Anything for Hillary Beckles will be there at it. So we're here, and I think lots of you thought the same way, and I thank you all for coming out, and I know the media will do justice to this evening's event. Thank you very much, all. Now, before you run off, the dean will direct me where I'm inviting you to have, first of all, don't just run off. A book launch should sell books. And make sure when you leave here tonight, there are no more books available, and he has to bring in some more. Hopefully it'll be by tomorrow. And, but let these books be all sold out tonight. And if by the time you get here and they are sold out, put your name on the list. Put your name on the list. There'll be a list. Put your name on it. I want a book. And you will get it. And even if Dr. Carter or Jeff Brooms, or we got to drive Broom to get a book to you, you will get your book. Be sure of that. And so you'll be here and you will get them autographed by Professor Beckles. And then you can also stay around and have some wine and juice. Wine and juice is still good for you. It's not the real thing, but it's good enough, wine and juice. Because I respect wine, I respect juice. I have a greater respect for fine Barbadian fermented cane juice. Thank you all. Have a very good night. Get home safely.